By then we were pretty sick of Pete Best too, because he was a lousy drummer, you know. He never improved, you know. And there was always this myth being built up over the years that he was great and Paul was jealous of him because he was pretty and all that crap, you know. They didn't get on that much together, but it was partly because Pete was a bit slow, you know. And he was a harmless guy, but he was not quick, you know. All of us were quick minds, you know. And he never picked up on the idiom, you know, and we were always going to dump him when we could find a decent drummer.
John didn't want people to get through to him. He could be the most unkindly, uncourteous person in the world. I mean, yeah, behaviour was there. I mean, you couldn't get it away from it, you know. He'd take the mickey out of cripples and pretend to be blind and, you know, pick on people and, you know, lose his temper and all the rest of it. But whether that was, the way I looked at it, that was a facade for John to stop people getting through to him. I mean, okay, it was a self-defense mechanism. When he did want people to get through to him, then he could be a totally lovable person. If his mother's death had anything to do with it, I mean, okay, that happened before I actually became friends with John. So it's something which I wasn't aware of, or it didn't tend to be a trait of John's. It was something which he just accepted John for doing. You realise talent when you see it. I mean, okay, and John had talent. It was as simple as that. I mean, to actually get me to turn around and say it was as a result of him taking drugs, which led to, you know, him becoming the John Lennon which we all know today. I mean, I really can't answer that question, simply because of the fact I wasn't there. I don't know what pressures that were going on, whether in fact he was, you know, he relied on drugs to come up with, you know, further material. But all I can say is that in the early days, when it was associated with him, no, it was just talent which came out. It wasn't drug influenced or drug orientated. I mean, each particular member of the band had their own charisma. Paul was a, you know, good delivery. John had a good delivery, but there was something there which was raw, it was uninhibited, and I think it was that which he later took and was developed many, many years afterwards into the type of music and the charisma which John has today.
George had done little of no rock and roll when we met him, and we'd never been in a studio, so we did a lot of learning together. He had a very great musical knowledge and background.
Even though they had nothing really behind them, they were still fairly irreverent even in those days, which I loved. You know, I like a little bit of rebel in people, and I like their sense of humour. After all, that was my main stock in trade too, and I guess they quite liked what I've been doing with Peter Sellers and the Goons and that kind of thing. I thought they had tremendous charisma. I knew that alone would sell them.
And we did a reasonable audition, not very good, but the thing he didn't like was our drummer.
And I said to Brian Epstein, when we do the next session, I mean, I don't want to interfere with the Beatles and what you're doing with them, that's fine, but I'm going to provide the drummer.
We really started to think we needed the great drummer in Liverpool.
Historically, it may look like we did something nasty to Pete, and it may have been that we could have done it better, but the thing was, as history also shows, Ringo was the member of the band. It's just that he didn't enter the film until that particular scene, you know?
It was a Wednesday and Brian called. I don't remember John calling though. It's in somebody's book. Would you join the band? And I said, what do you mean? He said, no, really join the band. And I said, sure, yeah, when? And he said, now. And I said, no, I can't do that. Because we've got these other four guys here. We've got a gig for months, and, you know, I can't just pull out now and it'd all end. So I said, I'll join you Saturday. Because we used to have Saturday off, because that's when they used to change the campers. So I gave Rory Thursday, Friday, Saturday to bring someone in, because to open again on Sunday, which I thought was giving them a hell of a lot of time. And that was it. We played the Cavern. There was a lot of fighting and shouting. Half of them hated me, half of them loved me.
There was a few people there who were shouting, Ringo never, Pete Best forever. And after about half an hour, I said, oh, bugger off or something. And stepped out of this. You know, the Cavern had this, it was 3 tunnels, and we stepped out of what was the dressing room into this dark tunnel, and some guy just like butted me right in the eye. That was a bad day. And then I walked under a bus, got hit by a double-deck bus.
George fought for me.
It is a, dodgy moment, and you don't know what to do. You know, you either stick loyally with your friend, like a lot of people probably would have liked to have seen us do, the Liverpool fans, and you get blown out. It's not an easy decision, that. So we talked amongst ourselves and talked with Brian and took a lot of advice on it all.
Yes, the Pete Best episode. It was rather tragic because Pete was very much part of the group. He was the drummer, of course, and whilst he didn't have much to sing about, matchbox occasionally, he was very dutiful. He always arrived on time. No problems, late coming and that. They decided that Pete would have to go out of the group. We held a meeting in a late pub after hours in Williamson Square, and we discussed it. The reason I was there, I was invited because Brian wanted my advice, because he didn't want to alienate any of the fans, you see, and Peter had his following. You see, and it was a very crucial period because they'd been to London and they'd done these tapes, but apparently Pete's drumming ability was not in favour of the recording studio. And the Beatles, apparently, not all of them were present that night, but they said, Pete must go.
We had a bit of a struggle. George didn't actually come to the first recording of Love Me Do. His assistant came, and Ron Richards, and myself. So we were left to Love Me Do, the first record. It wasn't terribly successful, not because of our fault, but because it just wasn't happening, you know, and particularly Ron thought, and later George, because of Pete Best, his drumming, which I never agreed to, actually. It wasn't what Pete was playing, it was, or rather, it wasn't because of his drumming, it was because of what he was playing in the head arrangement, which I thought was all wrong.
Talked to Pete Best?
Not in a long time. No, I haven't seen Pete in 20 years.
Wow.
You know.
Was that an awkward position to be in?
Yeah. It wasn't awkward when I was just sitting in with the Beatles, you know. If he didn't make the session, they'd call me and I started, you know, I would play with them, and, you know, that happened quite a bit. And then they informed me they wanted, you know, they asked me would I join permanently, and I said yes. I mean, the madness they went through, telling him his hours.
Yeah. That's rough.
Up to them.
You mean I can't do the Ed Sullivan show? You know, it's like, you're out. That's wild.
We'd played the Cabin the night before, and Brian came up to me. We were loading stuff in the van with Neil, giving John a lift home. And Brian just turned around and said, Pete, I'd like to see you in the office in the morning. I don't know more about it because since Brian had taken over as manager, I'd handled the business side of things before with Mona. And I just thought there was another brain-picking session. You know, he'd asked me for promoters, prices, should we play this venue, you know, what's this guy like, you know. I just thought, yeah, you know, wants a little bit more advice. So trundled in, no expectations. Went into the office about 11 o'clock in the morning, something like that.
I suppose that's when I became a little apprehensive about what was going to happen, okay, because Brian wasn't his normal cool, calm, placid self, you know, not like, oh, yeah, Pete, come in, you know, have a coffee, this type of stuff. He was very reticent, you know, and he basically talked around the subject for a while and then turned around very apologetically, I suppose that's the word, turned around and said, Pete, he said, I have bad news for you. He said, the boys want you out, and it's been arranged that Ringo will join the band on Saturday. And of course that was the bombshell, because I'd had no forewarning at all about this. All this had been going on behind closed doors. And at that stage, because of, you know, I suppose you'd turn around and say you're shell-shocked, you know, I was trying to think, what have I done wrong? What's the reason for it? And he basically turned around and said, well, they feel Ringo's a better drummer. And as I've always turned around and said, that was a matter of opinion, because I was rated along with Johnny Hutch to be one of the, top drummers in Liverpool. But again, that's food for thought. And everyone has their own opinion about that, So I went away. And it was only when I got back home to Mona and I explained the situation to Mona, the reality of the situation hit me. Because what I'd agreed to was that I would play 2 gigs before Ringo joined the band on Saturday. One at Chester Ballroom and somewhere else. Okay, details, it doesn't make anything at the moment. But when the reality of the situation hit me, and I got home, be honest, I cried. I broke down. I'd put 2 years of my life into this band. And basically on the cusp of just, first record release, which we hoped was going to do great for us, it was snatched from me. And Mo turned around and said, well, I'm not happy with that. I'm not happy with the, the reasons. So she tried to talk to Epstein. Epstein wouldn't answer the phone. In a sort of semi-conscious state, dumbstruck and shell-shocked, I'd agreed to it. But when I got back home, the reality was there. I just turned around and told Neil, tell Brian, I said, I can't play those gigs, But Brian must have already, I suppose, surmised that was going to happen, even though I agreed, because he had Johnny Hutch from the Big Three on the bill, and Johnny stood in on both occasions.